I'm Doug McKenzie from FinTech Finance. On today's bumper edition of the PayTech Show, we're traveling the globe with PPRO to find out more about LPMs, local payment methods, and how they differ from country to country and continent to continent. Firstly, Las Vegas, where we speak with Steve Villegas about what LPMs actually are.
Yeah, APMs, or we would consider local payment methods, alternative payment methods around the globe. Those are really the way that local citizens, consumers in those various jurisdictions and countries pay for their goods and services. Examples around the world, in Europe as well as Asia, there's a lot of bank transfer methods. And those are in the US, what we would look at as like an online banking. Consumers around the world use this bank transfer method, and they go in and on an e-commerce or online sale, they're using their bank, they're getting redirected to their bank to use their login, and they're actually doing an authorization to push the payment to that merchant. So very different from what we are used to in the US for certain. You go across to China, you have a lot of wallets. There's wallets, e-wallets around the world, and those are basically loaded funds that consumers can use electronically to pay for things, either through a QR code or a bar scan code or something along those lines, really giving authorization even on an e-commerce transaction using a bar scan off of a website or a QR code off of a website. And then the other predominant one would be cash-based methods. Obviously, a lot of the world still uses cash today. Obviously, it's becoming more and more minimized around places like the United States and the United Kingdom. But when you look at LATAM and even Asia, there's still a very, very much cash-based methods of payment. So how do they get around this from an e-commerce standpoint? Is you have payment methods, as we'll talk LATAM, like Boleto Bancario and OXXO, where those are actually, a consumer will go make an online purchase and they'll get a voucher for that online purchase, and they'll actually walk down to the convenience store, drive down to the convenience store and pay in cash, and the voucher will show paid, and then that transaction will be complete. So that's something we would never even think of doing in the US, but it happens around the world. And then you have some direct debit transfers that may take place as well, but those are predominantly the types of payments that make up the alternative payment landscape.
What are your theories as to why e-wallets took off so fast in China?
It was a perfect storm, right? The e-commerce growth was there, but then also why Asia? Why not? Or why China? Why not Europe? Right? So I would say there was no legacy system before, so it was not like Chinese people were used to pay with card and they changed to e-wallets. No, it was a cash society, right? And they basically leapfrogged card payments and went directly to the future e-wallets.
Can you give us a bit of a breakdown for the US market?
Sure. So the US market obviously is dominated by cards today. So there really isn't an alternative payment unless you're looking at things like PayPal, which would probably be one of the first dominant alternative payments. But really at the end of the day, it's a wallet that most people are using a card or a bank account to fund. And then you may have something like a Venmo, which is a P2P trying to transfer. So that might be as far as we look at in the US of being what an alternative payment is. Around the globe, though, obviously there are recognized alternative payments. In Europe, there are dozens of these alternative payments. Most of them are bank transfer methods. Some of them, like a bank contact in Belgium, is really used both as a card as well as an online payment method, but it's also a bank transfer method. And then you have things like Sofort and Ideal, Multibanco, which are all bank transfer methods that consumers in Europe are using. If you think about LATAM, I mentioned Boleto Bancario and OXXO as being the major cash-based methods, but there's dozens of others that are used more locally. Obviously in Asia, you think about the wallets of the world, Alipay and WeChat Pay, which are becoming really significant in the US for Chinese shoppers coming abroad and shopping in the US, visiting from a tourist standpoint. But globally, those are growing payment methods for two reasons. One is there's billions of Chinese, there's hundreds of millions that are using these payment methods, and they're shopping abroad. They're doing cross-border shopping on e-commerce. And then you have obviously a significant path of various APMs all across Pan-Asia, and then getting into India and Africa. So all of these variant payment methods dominate the landscape globally, but here in the US, obviously we're very card-centric. So as merchants begin to look at how am I selling my goods and services in Indonesia, what payment methods do I need to consider? How am I marketing to those consumers in that region? And those are all considerations. And so PPRO, in an effort to help the landscape here in the US, we work with a variety of acquirers and PSPs to provide them access to hundreds of local payment schemes across the globe. And we're giving them access really on a back end, on a white labeled solution. So they're presenting it to their merchants as it's their part of their total solution. And a merchant can sign up for various acquiring services that'll include both card, but it'll also provide them access to these other local payment schemes. So as they begin to sell abroad, as they begin to see that expansion, they'll be able to look to their acquirer, to their PSP, and say, hey, I need this payment method in this certain country. Can I get that turned on? And then they'll offer it to those consumers. So it really becomes a homogeneous exercise of providing an ideal solution to the consumers, so it's seamless for them, and it feels very natural for the consumers in the other countries to buy and even sell goods.
The last stop on our world tour is London, to find out from Ronnie D'Arienzo why AMPs are so important for today's online merchants.
Particularly for cross-border, it's really important. But even in market, you've got certain markets that will have a number of different payment methods that are quite prevalent. Germany is a good example. I mentioned Trustly, Sofort, Klarna, GiroPay, etc., as well as card and bank. So there's a lot of different payment methods even in that market. So offering one, and traditionally merchants will offer credit and debit card, won't be enough. Good example, I think I mentioned that only 42% of all of online purchases made across Europe are being using a credit card. So if you actually just offer a credit card, then you're missing out on potentially 60% of all of the consumers that want to make a purchase. We also know that 70% of people, and a survey that we've done recently shows the same figures, have abandoned their shopping cart because they didn't find the payment method that they required in there. So I think it's really essential that, in particular for merchants that are looking to attract consumers from overseas, they are really astute and aware of what preferences that consumers have from different markets and different industries as well.
We were interested to hear about the study that PPRO conducted into cross-border payments. Steve Villegas tells us more about the study and revealed all about the US market.
We recently released a study around cross-border payments specifically for the US and what's happening here in the US market. And it's astounding, some of the figures that we found. Certainly cross-border, everybody recognizes it's an important part of selling. I don't know that the merchants nor even the businesses, the acquirers and PSCs recognize how large of a market it is. When you look at what's happening today, 36% of merchants are selling cross-border. Some of them probably don't even realize it, or internally they may not even realize how much cross-border is coming across. It may be insignificant in some cases. But when you look at the revenue, this year the U.S. will have about $83 billion in goods and services sold cross-border. It's closing, actually that was last year. This year it'll be closer to $100 billion, and it's growing by a clip of 20% plus a year. In fact, it's estimated within 3 years it's going to be about a $200 billion market. So when you could look at that, first and foremost, most of that is happening via card, because most merchants are offering their cross-border sales by card, credit card. As merchants begin to recognize the need for local payment schemes within those nations, countries, regions that they're selling in, that's going to help them to have a significant leg up in capturing that revenue. Some of the stats that we show is when a consumer in another country goes online, and much like us, right? If you're shopping online and you don't see the payment method that you prefer to use, oftentimes, if you like to use Amex to shop and you don't see Amex available, you may decide you don't want to buy from that particular merchant. Well, the same thing happens in other countries. If their particular payment method is not available, we show a abandonment for that shopping cart 50% of the time when it's not offered. So that's really significant for merchants to consider, and for PSPs and acquirers here in the U.S. to help in educating their merchants on what the global marketplace looks like. So when you think about the growth of the revenue and where most of the cross-border is coming from today are bordering nations like Canada and Mexico, of course, like Britain, and then China would be the next from a regional standpoint of where most of the sales are coming from for cross-border. So the U.S. really hasn't even taken advantage of the largest markets from a growth standpoint in Asia and even further down in LATAM and in Europe, which is very, when you look at APMs and what's happening in the European market, it's a very mature market. The Eastern European, though, is growing at a significant rate from an e-commerce standpoint. So all of that, in considering what's happening, U.S. merchants, U.S. acquirers and PSPs really need to make that a focal point if they want to take advantage of that growing revenue pie. Globally, it's going to continue to get larger. E-commerce isn't going away, and everyone needs to take that into consideration. And right now is a better time than any to look at what's happening, what they're doing, how are they offering their goods and services across the globe, what's their marketing strategy, and most importantly, are they providing the right payment method in that region that those consumers are going to buy and make it easy for them.
We're very much in a global village at the moment with products and purchases happening from one corner of the world to another. How does the cross-border commerce aspect play into this?
Yeah, I mean, it's critical that you know that. People are making purchases online on a much regular basis now. This recent study in the UK showed that 85% of people had made an online purchase on a regular basis at least once a month, so it's very prevalent. You've got markets like Austria, as an example, interestingly Austria, who is the highest of cross-border payments. 76% of people are making cross-border payments in Austria, and that's relatively high in all markets. So it's really key that you understand where goods are being purchased from and where people are making purchase from. China finishes in the top 3 of literally every European market, but people are buying goods from Germany, UK and the US as well. So making sure that you're able to have that facility to enable cross-border payments is really key.
With this in mind, we take a look towards the future. Will we see a fragment payments landscape, or will it all come together with one clear-cut winner?
So I believe that the landscape will continue to be fragmented for quite some time. When you look at what's happening with global e-commerce and you have the Pan-Asian and Asian markets that are growing at 25% plus, you have Eastern Europe that's growing at double digits, 17, 18%. When you look at those landscapes and you think about how people are paying in those jurisdictions, they're using these local payment schemes, these alternative payment methods, and that's going to continue to dominate, at least from a US standpoint. We need to be aware of that. So certainly card is still dominant around the world, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, but as these local payment methods continue to grow and become really more effective for those local consumers purchasing online goods and services from merchants around the world, that's going to continue to become more fragmented. So you'll have merchants across the globe asking about certain payment methods because they're selling goods and services in one country and they're located in a completely entirely different country. And the consumers in those countries may be asking for, hey, I want to pay with this certain payment method and I can't buy the good or service that I want to buy. Can you help me? And as that continues to proliferate more and more, I think it's going to be, you'll see more fragmentation, but you'll also see collectively payment providers and acquirers will start to recognize that, and they're already recognizing it today. The largest merchants recognize that. They know when they're selling goods and services abroad that they need to offer certain payment methods. And that's going to continue to be a focal point. So while it may be fragmented from the types of payments, collectively you're going to see it come together where you're going to have offerings from companies that provide all of those payment methods for their merchants so they can provide the goods and services to those consumers in those other countries. And really that's why PPRO is collectively working with all of the acquirers to provide dozens and dozens of methods to the acquirers so they can provide it to their merchants. And therefore, they're able to sell their goods and services.
What do you see as the future trends when it comes to payments in Asia?
Well, people say if you want to look at the future of payments, you can look at China, right? And yeah, the e-wallets are used, take more than 50% of the local payments market. And it's Alipay and WeChat Pay, and their success stories are tremendous. Like Alipay started as part of the e-commerce platform, Taobao, and basically accompanied the huge success and growth of e-commerce in country. Yeah, it's an amazing story. And WeChat Pay, well, through the social network, is a story of its own, of red packets and how basically a cultural element has been transformed into the digital world. Yeah.
How do you look to keep your finger on the pulse for across the world new payment methods rising up? I.e. 15 years ago, mobile payments and wallets weren't really an option.
Yeah. Well, I in my business, in my role, look after the sales team, but my counterpart within this business has a role of doing exactly that and making sure that we understand and see what are the emerging products, what are the emerging markets, what are the emerging features, etc. So there is a team of people within this business that will do exactly that. So we complement ourselves pretty well in terms of viewing the landscape through two lenses. One through my team, through the lens of our customer, who will clearly be telling us what they need and what they see, and also through our team of experts within the business that are constantly viewing this landscape. And the combination of that enables us to prioritise our roadmap to make sure the right features, the right products are enabled for the customers to keep pace with the latest in the industry.
So obviously here in America, you have some of the biggest tech for fins, especially with their new marketplaces, Facebook, Amazon. How's that going to change the industry?
I think it's twofold. One is it allows consumers to purchase products at a faster pace, at a possibly a less expensive pace. And so that always drives consumer behavior. And certainly when companies want to offer frictionless payments, frictionless buying experiences for consumers, that becomes a large driver. And so marketplaces will help with that. They provide that to consumers. And more marketplaces will continue to develop. They may be in certain regions, they may be in certain verticals that offering products and services that allow those consumers to find what they're looking for at the click of a button and very easily, or price compare with a variety of marketplaces that allow them to find what's going to be the most cost effective for them. And certainly then there's shipping mechanisms, et cetera, that come into play. But the payment methods will always be behind the scenes, right? That's one of the things that PPRO does in providing we're a white labeled solution. So consumers will never know who we are. They may see a payment method that they recognize, that they want to connect to because that's how they're used to paying for goods and services. But all the functionality will happen in the back end. On the front end, it'll be very easy for them to click that payment method, make a bank transfer, use an e-wallet, complete a voucher cash-based payment down at the convenience store, but it'll all be based on what's most convenient and easiest for those consumers to make those purchases. And I think that's really where marketplaces come into play, is providing all of that from a seamless experience for consumers.
That's it from us. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join us on the next episode of the PayTech Show.